you went from making a movie about Bruce Lee to talking about the other famous Bruce for this film. What led you to this project?
Well, the idea actually came a little after Sundance in summer, fall of 2020. My producer, Julie Nottingham, who also produced Be Water, we were stuck in the middle of the pandemic in many ways and stuck at home and trying to think of like what projects we could do. And we were thinking archival is probably something that we would have to kind of focus on because we didn't know when we could shoot again. And she came to me with the story of We Are the World. I should say I was like 2 years old when the song came out. And so I didn't really know the impact of the song. I knew of the song when I was growing up because my parents were actually, newly arrived refugees from Vietnam. They spoke very little English, but for some reason they had Lionel Richie records and Kenny Rogers records, and they had We Are the World. And so they would listen to We Are the World at our house. And so that song like echoed through my childhood in many ways. And when Julia told me sort of the story and how it was all made in one night, that was quite compelling to me. And just kind of diving deeper into the story, I'm always like, what's my personal connection? What kind of vision can I bring as a director? And when I read it, I was like, this feels like a heist film to me. It's like, Lionel Richie is Danny Ocean. He's like assembling his Ocean's 11 through like getting Michael and Stevie Wonder, Bruce Springsteen, and all these folks. So I was through the lens of a heist film in a very subtle way. That was my into the film and sort of a director's perspective. But I guess like on a personal level, I was always up like a bit up in the air whether or not I was the right person to tell the story. But I was visiting my parents who have since moved back to Vietnam, and they were, they wanted me to do it, but I was still like, what? Like, I didn't imagine myself doing a We Are the World documentary. That's like the farthest thing I would think after Sundance 2020. But I got into this taxi cab, and there was a, 67-year-old Vietnamese taxi cab driver, didn't speak a lick of English, but he put a mix CD in, and the first song that he put in was We Are the World. And that was just serendipity for me. And I was like, there's something to the song where it's like reaching audiences all over the world. And since then, I'm a big karaoke fan. Going into a karaoke bar, it's usually like 1 in 3 chance you're going to hear people sing We Are the World.
Get the whole crew to sing along together to that one. I mean, that is interesting in terms of its global reach and its influence, that song. I mean, I was going to ask, so yeah, you were too young to know, its impact in the moment, but did your view of it change over time? Did you think differently of it? I mean, this is a song that has been, parodied to death and it obviously had a huge impact, but what was your impression of it, and what did you learn about, and how did your take evolve as you went on?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Bruce Springsteen puts it very well in the film. Like, you can judge the song aesthetically and for whatever it is. It's Bruce Springsteen technically singing a Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson song, which is kind of strange. But it was a tool, right? It was a tool for social change. It was a tool to show the power of art, culture, music to try to make a difference. And in that way, that was what was more interesting to me in terms of like the impact of the song, and not necessarily if I think it's a good song. That's the very subjective thing. But also I'm always interested in artistic process and like looking at culture. I think culture is a way to kind of like examine society. Like culture is really just a set of values that we all agree upon. And so that was such a cultural changing moment in 1985. And it's been hard to kind of mimic or replicate that today. I mean, I think it's quite impossible to do that in the same way. But for me, We Are the World, beyond its, the parodies and all that, it's become a metaphor, analogy of like just getting a team together, right? Now people just say they're like the Avengers, but back in the day, it's like, this is the We Are the World of this, that. Like, I remember like in the recent John Mulaney special, he called his intervention the We Are the World of alternative comedians. And so people, again, are using it in ways that just, it has such meaning, and people know, even again, if they don't know the name or the kind of behind the scenes of the song, or if they don't even know like who was on the song, they know what it means, what We Are the World means.
I mean, the You just mentioned that this is hard to recreate now. Why do you think that is? I mean, there's one element of like, how do we get all these people logistically into the same place, or what would that look like today? But then the other side of it is, the social media sort of age. Is there just too much cynicism today to make something like this work, or what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I hope the film can inspire a generation of artists, musicians to try to replicate it. But I think, like, just on a logistical level, as you said, to kind of get all those artists in one room without having managers, agents, publicists, no shade on publicists or anyone like that. But, it was such a vulnerable moment for those musicians because they were just in a room full of other artists and musicians. And that vulnerability, I think, is what is emphasized a lot in the film. And I also think, like, in today's media landscape, there's so many things coming out. It's hard to make a moment like We Are the World was. It was truly, because I was quite young when the moment happened, I didn't feel that moment. But in my research for the film and making the film, we saw how global it was. And I think now it's really hard to kind of like cut through everything that people have to go through and grab people's attention. So I think that would be another reason where it wouldn't live up to the hype of the original.
Yeah. And you mentioned it being kind of like a heist film in a way. You've got, people pinning like pictures to bulletin boards or cork boards or whatever. But obviously this is, one night. Obviously you're telling before and after, but what were some of your challenges of like keeping that tension there and finding enough meat in like, hey, this is focused on that tiny chunk of time that this happened.
Yeah, I mean, on top of the sort of heist element, we were trying to build a lot of tension, like race against the clock, like a cliffhanger. I always think of like Hitchcock, the bomb under the table thing, where we see that there's a bomb under the table and we're just waiting for that bomb to explode. And so we actually added the elements of the ticking clock into our film. Those weren't things that were part of the archive. We kind of added that to kind of build the kind of visual language of the film. And those are some of the things that, talking to people like Huey Lewis, talking to Lionel Richie, obviously, they told us like how tense that night was. And it's funny because Steve Perry, who couldn't participate in the actual film, has seen a cut of the film, and he told us that watching the film was like more intense than actually being there in a good way. Like, he just didn't know everything else was going on. He was so focused on his part. So I was glad that he, even being in the room, felt very immersed in the film as well.
Why was Lionel Richie ready to talk about this now? Why this movie at this moment?
I think, we've seen like in the last year that people really want an anchor to something familiar. They're nostalgic for something, like with the Wham documentary, for instance. And we're sort of on the eve of the 39th anniversary. The film is going to come out on Netflix on January 29th, and then the actual recording was January 28th. And so all those things kind of come into play. But for me, this is a film about the power of art, the power of music to unite, to heal, to kind of inspire people for social change and to try to make a difference. I think we always sort of need that conversation in our society. I think sometimes that conversation can be fueled by a bit of cynicism. So this film, in addition to hopefully being a fun ride for everyone, also be a way to inspire future generations.
But is there a reason that Lionel Richie was like, yeah, I'm ready to just, open up the vault and, were there reluctance to like talk about this before, or like just, I don't know, what was the reason that he wanted to make this movie today?
Yeah, well, he said like he's been approached many times to make it, but he hasn't found the right team. And he was a fan of B. Water and Larry Klein, who is an American Music Awards producer. He got a phone call from our producer, Julia Nottingham, and he basically told Julia, I've been waiting for this phone call for 35 years. And so I think that, it's hard to think of the alchemy that has to take place when making film, but some things just kind of come into place at the right time. And I think Lionel, sadly, we've lost Harry Belafonte, Tina Turner in just the past year while we were making the film. I think it was a reminder for him, like if he doesn't tell this story soon, we just might not have enough time.
And are there people who were there that you would have really wanted to pick their brain about, people that obviously you couldn't, or that just weren't able to speak with you for this?
Yeah, I mean, we reached out to everyone in a way. It was life imitating art, trying to get people, wrangle people for this project. Lionel was paramount in getting people like Bruce Springsteen. You can just call up Bruce Springsteen. But for me, of course, Bob Dylan would have been. I mean, we all, you're all a journalist. You know that it's hard to get a Bob Dylan interview, but we would have loved a Bob Dylan interview. But at the same time, I think it's beautiful that we capture him in the verite, in the moment so well. He has a full arc. The beginning is a bit humorous, but it comes out triumphant in many ways in the film. But I also think about what Bruce Springsteen said about Bob Dylan, that he's an enigma. It was nice to kind of keep him as the mythical Bob Dylan by not interviewing him.